So welcome to this opportunity to meet with a couple of members of the Harvard debate team. In total, we have 3 panelists for you today. So we have Will, Angela, and Hugo. Hugo's actually finishing off a debate tournament as we speak. It's Friday night in the States. So his commitment to debate means he's running a wee bit late. So I know that he's already shared some of his thoughts with Will and Angela, but hopefully he'll be able to join us during the course of the seminar. What we're going to do today is we're going to split this into basically 3 parts. First of all, just talk about the importance of debate, the role of debate in applications to college and more generally. Secondly, just a bit more about college applications and dreaded personal statements and all that kind of thing. And then thirdly, life as a Harvard student, life in the Harvard debate team, and questions related to that. So 3 different sections. Some people pre-submitted questions, which is awesome. If you didn't, you're very welcome to ask a question either in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question at the appropriate moment. So we will take a moment at the end of each group of questions just to see if there are any more. So I really encourage you to get involved and to ask questions. It's a great opportunity until such time as you're debating against Harvard in a competition. Probably the best opportunity you have for their undivided attention. So if I can just start off maybe by asking Will first, and then Angela, if you can just briefly introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, of course. Hope you can all hear me okay. My name's Will. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, so that's why I sound a little bit funny. I am a freshman here at the college. I live in Holworthy House, which probably doesn't mean a lot to anyone. At Harvard, we have what everyone else calls majors, but what Harvard calls concentrations. And I'm intending to concentrate in philosophy and maths, or maybe linguistics. I'm not too sure yet. That's sort of like a work in progress. My ideas about concentration change based on the weather, it seems. Very brief, like debating experience, I'll say very quickly. I sort of did it throughout high school. I think I sort of started in year 7, and I don't think I did it in year 8, but I definitely then started up again sort of in high school. I was from Australia, so we did a sort of a 3v3 Austral style, and I hung around the state circuit a little bit and did quite well in my home state of Victoria. I didn't actually do Worlds. I didn't try out for Worlds, but it's sort of a major regret of mine because everyone who did it seems really to have loved it and to have found it very formative. So it's regretful. I'm currently in the Harvard College Debating Union, which is at Harvard, and we debate APTA, which is American Parliamentary, and BP, which no doubt some of you will be familiar with. And I'm really loving it and loving to get to do lots of tournaments.
Cool, Angela.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela. I'm a sophomore at the college, but I did take a gap year, so I should have been a class of 2024. This semester, I'll be declaring my concentration, and I'll be studying applied mathematics with a secondary in either studio art or dance. Also probably not too relevant to you guys, but for anyone who does know the houses, upperclassmen get sorted into houses like Hogwarts style, and I'm in Winthrop House, which is the best house on campus by far. What else is important? Oh yes, I'm from Toronto, Canada originally, so I debated with Team Canada in 2019 and 2020 at Worlds, and I did a combination of British parliamentary, world school style, and Canadian styles that you probably don't know of, but are very familiar with, very similar to international styles as well. And I'm also on the Harvard College Debate Union. I'm more of a social member and I judge more. I feel like I don't compete as much as I did in high school for sure, but I really love the union and everyone in it. So yeah.
Awesome, thanks both. And as I said, Hugo hopefully will be able to join us a bit later on. So I wanted to start by just asking a couple of questions that we had about debating, and specifically, I guess, the value of debate, or to be a little bit more transactional, the value of debate in helping you to get admitted to Harvard. So maybe we can start with the second question first. How much do you think that being involved in debate helped you to get to where you are now, either directly, somebody in an admissions office saw debate and they thought, oh, great, or indirectly in terms of the soft skills that helped you to develop? Maybe Angela first.
For sure. I think debate was very helpful in helping me get into college, both in terms of soft skills and my application directly. Like I wrote my common application, which is my main personal statement about debating. It was the first activity on my extracurricular list, which means it was most important. I think that, so I used to be like a very shy student and I didn't really like public speaking. And so that's why I got into debate, to kind of challenge myself. And I found that the activity helped me grow a lot as a person in terms of my vocabulary, my ability to write. If anyone does like advanced placement exams like APs, the AP English language and composition exam and a bunch of other exams in the humanities and social sciences are pretty much just like debate, where they ask you to write on a position like in a short amount of time. You know, school presentations also follow the same format. So I found it very helpful. And just like in terms of getting into Harvard, I think all Ivy Leagues really love debaters, but especially Harvard. Like one time when I was sitting in Annenberg last year, which is our freshman dining hall, I realized that my entire table was filled with debaters. So there was 2 WSDC champions, which is World Schools Debate Championships, the National Policy Champion, the National Lincoln Douglas Champion, and like a bunch of other debaters. So it's just like, they're everywhere. I'm pretty sure like 85% of the school has done debate at some point. And so it's definitely something that's very valued here. And you don't have to be like a humanities or social sciences person to get into it. I'm definitely not. And a lot of my friends in the union especially are also studying like stats, computer science, physics. So it's like just like a really good background to have, I think.
Yeah, so Ari, my own thoughts on this. I didn't make debating a really substantive part of my application. I think I might have mentioned it. I think on the Common App, you can list some of the extracurriculars that you did. And you can list about 10 and give like a 40-character description of it. I think I listed it as one of those. Like I had done quite well in my state circuit and done very well in a quite competitive arena, but I didn't make it a massive part of my application. And I am fine with that. I think maybe more RE soft skills. Like debating is really the art of articulation and trying to convince people of something. And so I think that debating really helped me to like articulate what was within. I know that sounds very sort of vague and wishy-washy, but like it allows you to put onto the page, particularly for the essays that you're writing, where you're trying to convince someone who's sitting across, on the other side of the world through only written writing, how you feel and care about a particular issue in your essays, for example. Debating certainly helped me to develop the kind of the language and the argument structure and the kind of schematics of thinking to deal with that. I think, Andrew's already talked about, the way that certainly lots of debaters tend to pop up at Harvard. I'm not sure that Harvard will accept you on the basis of your debating. I think probably debating will be one of many factors that they will consider. I think it's certainly, it doesn't hurt to be really, really good at debating. But I think Angela's already given a very comprehensive assessment so far.
Yeah, well, that's 2 great answers because they're 2 slightly different answers. So I think that's in itself valuable, right? There's no one silver bullet which is going to magically get you into Harvard. That said, I'm interested to know either in your experience or in your assessment. Obviously, the people in the chat are mostly debaters. So how do you think it's best to present your debating experience in an application? What I mean by that is, is it enough to just list debating and how awesome it is? Or do you think that achievements are impressive to selectors? Or, what do you think it is about debating that would catch the eye of somebody looking at an application? I don't know if that's a tough question. Will, maybe I've stumped you.
Yeah. Do you want me to, Angela, do you want to go?
If you have an answer, you can go for it too.
Yeah, I think on that point, I think this question actually transposes quite well into lots of other extracurriculars, which is that like if Harvard wanted your resume, they would get you to submit a resume. But the essays are different to a resume. The essays really, like Harvard, I think probably, and I think lots of Ivy League, I think lots of unions in the US really care deeply about why you're doing something. Because if you're doing something as a means to an end, I think they'll be able to smell that from a mile off. I think, again, I don't know how the admissions department works, but I suspect that they care a lot about why you are genuinely and deeply interested in a particular activity. Like you debated for 6 years in high school. Like why? Clearly it was a big part of your life. What motivated you with that? Like Angela was talking about before about developing confidence and like skills and articulation. Maybe that was something really important for you. And maybe that's the part of the reason that motivated you to do debating. And then you ended up actually doing really well and sort of competing at the world stage. Like that kind of journey where taking part in an activity is so important for a kind of personal growth, and them also being able to see you identifying that and seeing how an activity changes you over time. Like I think that would be something quite helpful to talk about. Yeah, but that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks. Yeah, Angela, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with what Will said. They have a section where you can list your achievements and your accomplishments, but I would leave that there, but then not really get into that in your essay, because they already know you did well competitively here, but they want to know more, like what your CV or your activities list can't show you. So in my case, I think that debate was an important part of my application because I spent so much time on it in high school, and it really shaped me. And so I kind of went into the background of how I got started and how I changed over time as a result of debate. And so I think it was less important what activity it was and how well I did in it. Honestly, it was more about what I took away from it and what traits I exhibited from participating in this activity. So I think that goes for any extracurricular, and debate is a particularly meaningful one, and one that they commonly get. And so I've got a lot of advice going into college admissions being like, oh, like they have so many debaters applying, like they've already read like every single freaking essay that they could about debate, like maybe you shouldn't write about it. And I definitely agree that they see a ton of debating applications. So I would say that make sure yours is very unique and personal to you. Otherwise, it is just like kind of an activity that everyone else does. And so that's the part that I think will distinguish you from other applicants.
Yeah, and thanks for that answer. That takes me to a question that we were asked about the kind of debate competitions that you might recommend participating in. This is a question that sometimes I've been asked by parents who are trying to decide on a debate format for their children. Like, should I do World Schools? Should I do public forum debate? Should I do British parliamentary? And obviously, if you're in the States, you also have the option of policy debate and so on. So I guess the question is, do you think there's any importance attached at all to format, or is it really, as you say, just a question of the passion and dedication and hard work that you've shown for debate over the time that you've been doing it? Angela, maybe you can give me your opinion on that.
Sure. I don't think the format matters too much. I think the more important thing is they do care about like the prestige of the tournament. And so I think the size of the tournament, for example, at what level the tournament is at. So I think World Schools is a fantastic format for international students, because if you get to the World Schools level, like a bunch of my friends from different national teams all end up in the US at school just naturally, because it's kind of like a feeder pipeline in many ways. I think British parliamentary is also great. There's an invitational tournament called ICID for young debaters in England, also Cambridge Union, BP Invitational, Oxford. Those tournaments are also very prestigious. Don't know too much about public forum. I would say if you're international, I would try more to do BP, World Schools. But if you have the chance to compete in the US, that would also be cool too.
Will, any thoughts?
Yeah, I pretty much second that. I think that, certainly if you can perform really well at, at like a world's type level, that's fantastic. Equally as much, I know people who are on the HCDU who have done lots of the kind of US formats. I mean, it just stunned me at how many, arriving as an Australian who'd only done sort of Australs and BP, arriving in the US and realizing there are 50,000 different, state-based formats that there are. Lots of them are on the HCDU. So yeah, I think maybe the kind of format might not matter as much as maybe A, the size of the tournament, and B, it's kind of its prestige, which might certainly be helpful.
And I assume everybody should come to the Harvard World Schools Invitational next spring. I assume will that be in person in Cambridge, not online? Yeah. Or we don't know yet.
Okay. Yes, and we'll be judging.
There we go. So everybody needs to start saving up for a flight to Boston. So it's going to be epic. Okay, one last question about the role of debating and applications, and then if there are any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We had a question about scholarships. Now, this may be outside of the bounds of your personal knowledge, I don't know, but the question was, are debaters given scholarships in Harvard? And more generally, do you know if there are many full ride scholarships given to international students? This is obviously something that people are very keen to know. Will?
Yeah, so Harvard doesn't award scholarships for anything. So let me say that. So there are officially no, you can be a brilliant musician and you can, be a brilliant sports person or debater, and that sort of won't be part of their calculus. Harvard does offer what's called needs-based financial aid. And they're also one of only, I think maybe 4 schools, I think in the whole of the US, maybe, that are what's called needs blind internationally. So what that means is that you when you apply to Harvard, I don't even think when you initially apply you actually have to put in your financial information, but when you apply, basically they don't really look at your financials. They just see, is this person someone that we would like to admit to the college? That might, and debate might be a part of that admission, that they're putting that to the side. Then what happens is, if you get into Harvard, then you send they take your financial documentation and they say, how much is this person able to afford, and they have a special formula they use. And I know several international students who are on 100%, they don't pay a dime to come to Harvard. Equally as much, I know people who are paying the full cost of tuition because their families, they have enough money that they can sort of be supported. And there's a spectrum. So some people are on partial financial aid, some people are on full financial aid. But the key thing is that it's needs based. And the line from Harvard is that, I think it's that every student can pay to attend Harvard. That is to say, if you're, really sort of financially struggling, then the financial aid from Harvard is probably going to be quite big. But if you can pay the full cost of tuition, then Harvard won't, it probably isn't going to be offering financial aid. Yeah, but I'm not sure if I've left anything out.
Yeah. Does that sound right to you, Angela?
Yeah, they have a very, very generous financial aid program. I think Harvard and Princeton have some of the best. So you will not have to worry about financials if you want to come here. It's all about if you're the right fit for the school. I actually do have a stat on the top of my head because one of my friends films YouTube videos for Harvard, and she said that I think 55% of the college has some sort of financial aid. So that's a significant amount of the population that gets some sort of help from Harvard, whether that's 100% or just 25%. You'll be able to afford to come here though.
It's an amazing stat. I had no idea. Okay, we're going to move on to talk a little bit about other elements of applications rather than debate. If anyone has any questions about debating and how you use them in your quest to get into an Ivy League college, then feel free to ask. You can type them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. If not, then we will move on. We can also come back to it. We can circle back to it in a few minutes. Okay, so we had this great general question, which is, what does Harvard seek in a student? Okay, so this is not an opportunity for you to list all your wonderful qualities, but I guess this is something people often struggle with, right? What exactly is it that Harvard seeks in a student? Will, nice easy question for you.
I don't really know. No, I don't think it's any one specific thing. And I think that if people would have cracked the code to Ivy League admissions if we knew the answer to this question. I have a vague idea. Maybe I have some conjectures, some theories, and I'm sure Angela will also have some ideas about this. I think Harvard probably wants to see a few things. I think they probably want to see genuine intellectual curiosity. Again, admissions can smell resume building from a mile off. So stocking a CV full of lots of different shiny things isn't going to, I think, go very far. I think that I had people who were interested in literary scholarship, and they were really interested in literary criticism of Shakespeare, and they spent the whole of high school just focusing on that and putting on special productions of plays that were historical and writing in journals, and that was a genuine intellectual curiosity of theirs. They didn't do any debate and they didn't do anything else. They just did this because it was what they really adored and were passionate about in life. And then I guess the admissions officers were like, cool, that person seems really genuinely intellectually curious and wants to come to school. That's just one example, by the way. There's a whole spectrum of different domains in which people can be interested in. So I think intellectual curiosity is important. I think also that they probably want to see a contribution back to community. It's certainly the case that like lots of people, can be very good at building up their own skills, but a lot of what you see across Harvard is that lots of people took part in service in high school, and typically that service was also long-term. So going to a soup kitchen once a year might not be the kind of long-term like commitment and engagement with a community that shows that you actually really genuinely care about outcomes for people that are well off in society. Those are sort of two things. There's a whole lot of other things, but I'm sure Angela will also have some other ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are for sure important qualities. I think I was actually at lunch when I saw some of the questions that we might have been asked, and I polled some of my friends, and like the top one I definitely think is leadership. Like of any school, I think Harvard here, like everyone here took some sort of strong leadership position in high school. I actually anecdotally, there was a Team Canada debater that I knew quite well when I was much younger, and he had won pretty much like every tournament in Canada, like first top spoke a bunch of tournaments, but he didn't end up getting into many US schools. And I think one reason was you can be very excellent on your own and have great standard achievements, but if you don't try to kind of give back and take leadership roles in your community, it doesn't mean much. So he never took any senior leadership positions or really did anything beyond just competing on his own. And so if you can pair excellence with other qualities, because Harvard is looking for a human being that is an enjoyable roommate, classmate, someone you want as your proctor or tutor in your dorm, like, then I think you'll be set up for success. So I think leadership is important. And I would say emphasis on extracurriculars more than anything, like a vibrant, interesting extracurriculars or things that you pour a lot of time into. So I think what he said about like the depth of involvement is really important. I mean, breadth is also important, but I think depth is most important. You can spend your time in like 12 different activities, but not really meaningfully have any impact on either. So being able to do that is great, because then you can go onto your activities list and summarize, like, here's how many hours I put into this per week. Here's what my impact was in terms of raw numbers. Like, did I increase the number of kids in the club? Did I donate this amount of money? Did I raise so and so and so? So those are some of the things I think they're looking for. I think people who are well spoken also, just because there's an interview, you have to interact with your teachers who write your recommendation letters. And finally, I think something about like just caring about the world in some way, or being informed about issues. You don't need to be like a debater, like, or I guess everyone here is a debater anyway, so it doesn't matter, but you don't need to know a ton about world issues. But I think most people here, no matter what they study, to some extent care about the world and have an opinion on those issues, because you'll certainly be questioned about some of those things in your interviews.
We have a question in the chat. You're both international students. You may or may not be able to help with this, but the question was if there are any US boarding schools you can recommend for debaters. So I don't know if you are familiar with some of the schools that your teammates went to.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I know a lot because like I debated against Team USA a lot, and I have a lot of American friends that come from boarding schools. There's the obvious ones like, Andover, Phillips, Exeter. Those ones are or the Phillips Academy. Those ones are very, very prestigious, and they tend to be high, like feeders into Harvard and other Ivy Leagues. I think like St. Paul School in New Hampshire as well. I don't know if this one is a boarding school. It probably is, but Harvard Westlake in Los Angeles or in California. So you have some geographic diversity. A lot of them are concentrated in New England, though. I think that's a really great place to go to if you want to think about debating or boarding schools generally.
And equally as much, maybe just to add on to that, like I think it's also the case at the very other end of the spectrum that I also know some people on HCDU who had no kind of debate access at their high school at all. And so they spent their high school setting up a debate team at their school and getting their school into the league and then training their teams so that they could be really good and then, do well in the league. So I guess it's like, just a different perspective, like, maybe that kind of situation might also demonstrate a kind of leadership and equipment to debating. Yeah, just to supplement.
Sure. And this again blends into a question we asked about other extracurriculars or other clubs which are favorable. And as you've said, like leadership is important, and showing, you know, genuine passion as opposed to resume building is very important. But when you know, talking to your friends, your teammates, are there certain kind of extracurriculars that people have done, or that just come up again and again, or the sort of common threads that you notice in teammates again and again from their school days?
I definitely see, not just in the HCBU, like at Harvard generally, a lot of people did student government because that's like the most direct form of leadership. A lot of people did Model UN or mock trial, which are like very similar to debating. A lot of people were in their school newspaper. Like a lot of people here are editors of their school newspaper, and tons of sports activities. Like if you saw the Harvard admissions like Supreme Court case, they actually released a document on the factors they judge applicants by. And I don't know if Will has gotten a chance to do this, but we actually can request our admissions file. And if you go onto your admissions file, you can see there are 5 or so categories that they rank you on. And so there's like academics, extracurriculars, and sports is a separate category. So if you're good at sports, that's actually quite favorable to your application, but you have to be like pretty good, because you can't just like be like a member of your team. You hopefully are like in some sort of leadership position or doing well in tournaments as well.
I completely agree with everything Angela said. As I said, I haven't requested my admissions file because I'm sort of slightly worried of what I may find there. The very candid comments of the Harvard admissions department. But I completely agree with everything Angela said.
And how important do you think extracurriculars are compared to grades? This is something that students have asked this year and last year, which is, you know, obviously you need to have good grades to get into Harvard. That's understood, but or maybe not. Well, you're about to tell me I'm wrong.
I think both are necessary, but neither is sufficient. To use the language of philosophy, I think that it'll be quite difficult to get admitted to Harvard if you actually do nothing outside of school. Like if you want to be a brilliant like scholar and just sort of do scholarly stuff, then there are a bazillion other colleges in the US that will, you know, maybe better suit you. But Harvard wants someone who's a little bit more than that. So, and this actually was something interesting because as an Australian, I come from an admission system for university, which is just totally foreign. So we have something that's very Gaokao like actually, where you get a percentage, you get a grade from 0.05 to 99.95. It's bell curved, and universities see that and your student number. They don't see what school you come from, they don't see your gender, you don't see your name, anything else. And all the courses are just based on cutoffs. So moving from that kind of system to a US system where you have to write about you and about what you care about and what motivates you and what you do outside of school is very, very weird and sort of a bit alien to me. But I think extracurriculars are really big. I think that like you want to be like relatively, you want to be like quite good at each of them. But I think that there are then some trade-offs, you know, when we talk about time that happens. So maybe you could spend 40 hours studying for a particular exam you have to increase your, you know, like your grade in that exam by like 1%. And maybe that might be important to you, but you might also spend that time like practicing an instrument so that you can put on a recital or something, or you could spend that time, you know, doing a little bit more volunteering and getting like a project that you've got going off the ground. And maybe those will yield better incremental utility in respect of your extracurriculars. But those are just some vague, uncollected thoughts. So I'm sorry about how incoherent that was.
That was pretty coherent to me. I agree with the neither are sufficient for getting in alone. I would say if you had to like choose between them, I would say extracurriculars are more important than grades, just because with all these statistics, there was also this crazy statistic about how many people who apply to Harvard have perfect 4.0s and perfect SATs, and those could fill the class size like 20 times over. So I think like I know some people who definitely didn't have 4.0s, but they had really outstanding extracurriculars, and that explains why maybe their grades weren't like perfect, because they just spent so much time outside of school doing other things. what else? I think, yeah, so those are the only things that I have on that. I had something else, but I think I forgot. I'll let you know if I remember it.
Sure, I'm sure we can cycle back to it. Okay, so another question which we had a couple of times and also have been asked many times is about personal statements, about you know, you're making the pitch to admissions that it should be you out of these thousands of applicants. So this is a very broad and open-ended question, I guess, but how do you feel that you fit into the school, or what do you think the best approach to take for a personal statement or a supplemental essay or whatever it is that you have to do? How do you show that authenticity or that passion in a world where everybody is also trying to do the same thing? I mean, it's almost kind of game theory, I guess, trying to optimize your chances. So maybe Will, you can share your experience of that.
Yeah. So when you apply to Harvard, there's some colleges where, actually, I'll backtrack a little bit. So on the Common App, as I'm sure lots of you know, you have this big personal statement, which is a 650-word essay, and the topics change each year, but they're broad enough that basically it's like you can write about what you want. You then, when you apply to Harvard, I think you submit, I can't remember, I think it might be a couple of 100-word small essay, but then this big essay, which is like almost another personal statement, is just for Harvard. And so you have a lot of room to write. And you basically have two quite long multi-page essays where you can write about anything that's sort of up to your discretion. I took very different angles on both of them. I wrote my personal statement. It's sort of a little bit personal, so I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but it was about some sort of personal growth that happened for me throughout high school that was motivated by some maybe more adverse experiences that I had in middle school. So that was a little bit more reflective and a bit more kind of like narrative-like. And then the statement to Harvard ended up being about a very sort of weird experience I had in, I think it was 10th grade or something, and then that then related to my passion for physics. So I think there's not a cookie cutter approach to the personal statement. I think it probably should be interesting and engaging and lucid. These are not like book reports or papers or analytical essays that you'll write like for like an English class or something. These are things where you're really trying to communicate to an admissions officer why you're a really interesting person and why they can then stand up in the admissions committee room and argue for you. I think just like they can be about almost anything. They can be about interesting incidents that have happened in your life that you'd really just like to meditate on for 650 words. They can be about maybe what motivates you. Like if you honestly sit with yourself and identify, like, what do I care about deeply in this world and why? That might be a good way to start getting you thinking. There might be about, as I talked about before, kind of a sort of trajectory of growth that you've had. Like what does you right now look like versus you 4 or 5 years ago? So it's really that kind of quite nuanced, complicated self-examination that oftentimes a lot of these essays focus on.
Angela?
Yeah, so I think he covered the anatomy of the application very well. The supplemental essays are basically Harvard specific. So Common App goes to every school. Harvard only receives your supplements. Harvard is the only school that receives your Harvard specific supplements. So there's one on an extracurricular, there's one on intellectual activities outside of the classroom, and then one that's like very open-ended. You can write about anything. That's what I really like about Harvard's application. It doesn't really force you to say anything you don't want to write about. I think a lot of other schools have the why us, like the why Yale essay, but like Harvard's like we know you want to come here. We want to know what more about you. And so for mine, like the main one, I wrote a lot about, I think, like my upbringing, and then later tied it into debate. It was very personal to me. Like if anyone read it, they'd be like, this is written by Angela. And I think that distinguishes a very good essay. Like if you had a stack of papers and you got your closest friends in the room and they had to read all of them, which one would they identify as you? So I hope your voice is able to be kind of distinct and clear through it. So that's why it's super important you write your essay on your own, and you only kind of get edits from other people, but not take materials that wouldn't otherwise come out of your mouth, if that makes sense. I also think like very like story-based telling is super important. So this is one of my favorite kinds of writing where it's very narrative based and it's kind of almost like writing the essay of your life. So that was my main essay. My supplemental essays, I wrote about like dance because I danced a lot in high school too. And then intellectual activities as well outside of class. So I didn't talk about debate anywhere else in my application, but the main one, you want to limit how much you talk about one activity to show you have breadth. And then for my long, like optional essay, it was a little bit complicated. It was kind of about a book I read and how that tied into some of the service work that I did in my school and in my broader community. I think the prompt was like, what is something that was like really meaningful to you that your application could not be submitted without? And so you want to make sure like every part of your, like the most important parts of your personality show through, and that your like those individual traits can be traced into your application, because you would expect like they don't have that much time to read your application, but it's actually shocking how much they can learn about you just from your essays and from your recommendation letters. Like one of my friends, I don't think his essays were that goofy, but they were like able to put in his admissions file that this guy seems like a little bit like the class clown, like a very humorous kind of person. And they wrote in mine that my essays were like pretty serious. And that's how I was in high school for sure. And I didn't even realize that until I had read them again after with a different perspective. So I think your voice is very important and they can tell very obviously from your essays.
And I think that's an awesome piece of advice, that you should write your essay so that somebody who knew you would know that it was you. I think on the flip side of that, are there any things that you think people should avoid? Like any sort of pitfalls that that it would be? I mean, obviously, you know, taking large chunks of content from somewhere else and putting it into your personal statement is obviously a no-no. But do you think there's anything else that, you know, would just be maybe not a red flag, but a waste of a paragraph, or a poor use of that opportunity?
Maybe like, it's not really a pitfall, maybe just don't try to be or sort of do something that isn't true. That's not a point about misrepresentation. That's just saying, like, if you're not a naturally humorous person, maybe don't try to be humorous in your essay. Or, you know, if actually you are just writing about an extracurricular and trying to kind of imbue it with some meaning where there actually isn't meaning, maybe you should focus on something else. Yeah, but yeah, I can't really think of anything that would immediately be a red flag. Do you have any thoughts, Angela?
Yeah, I think so what you said about like faking traits that you don't have, like I would definitely not been able to have a funny essay because I was not very funny in high school. I think also just like trying to be like quirky. I think a lot of people like read essays that get into like Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, whatever. Like if anyone's read the Costco essay, like that's like a quirky essay stereotypically. And like a lot of people try to do things that are really like out there. They're like, I'm gonna write an essay about chocolate. And like if that's something that's super meaningful to you and you think is like very personal, then that's fine. But I would say like don't be scared of doing topics that are like common. Like mine was literally just about debating, which everyone and their mom has probably done. But if you make it personal to you, it doesn't matter. Whereas like artificially making yourself into like an interesting, unique person with like a particular contemporary topic does not always fly well. I think also like listing out accomplishments and like rehashing things that are already in your application, like you have space for your activities. So tell things that wouldn't be able to be in your like activities list in the short like paragraphs that you write about them. So tell them about anecdotes that they wouldn't be able to tell from an activities list. Don't be egotistical either. Like a lot of your essays should hopefully show humility as well.
Awesome, thanks for those answers. I'd love to take any questions that we have in the chat from people specifically about applications, about, you know, what you should write, about what you should try and highlight, any other questions you might have about the process of actually trying to get to Harvard specifically, but I guess college in the States generally. I just have one more question on this, which was asked previously, which is one thing that you wish you'd known when you were, like, if you go back, time machine, go back 2 years or whatever it might be, that would have made your life easier. I mean, obviously, you guys are both in Harvard, so to an extent, you know, I'm not sure quite what the word is, survivorship bias or something. You made it, right? So obviously whatever you did worked, but is there something you wish you'd known which would have made your life easier or less stressful at that time? Will?
Yeah, so I have something, this might sound like academic heresy, I talked about the Australian domestic admissions thing, which is where it's a scale from, it's in increments of 0.05. It's from 0.0995. I got a particularly good score in that scale, but I think I could probably have reclaimed maybe 200 to 300 hours of my time, maybe more, to 200 to 300 hours of my time, and had a score that was 0.05 lower. And I, in retrospect, realized that that would have been actually completely fine. I think that in terms of US admissions, like, Angela gave the analysis before, which is that actually, lots of these US schools, like, they have legions of people with perfect grades. Like, if they were looking for perfect grades, like, that they're sort of not struggling there. So I think maybe I would have, if I had done things differently, honestly, I would have accepted a slightly lower academic score, just to have a little bit more time to really get even deeper into particularly some of the service work I was doing, which is really interesting and I was really adoring. It was working up in Northern Australia with remote communities. I would love to have spent a little bit more time on that in retrospect, because that would have been so interesting, and I think would have actually been really cool to be able to write a little bit more about, but I couldn't really write about it in a developed way because I hadn't done a lot of time on it. And it also would have just freed things up a little bit, because as you all know, being in high school is really tough, particularly as you get to the last few years, and it's a bit of a pressure cooker. So yeah, that's just broad thoughts.
I completely agree with, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit, with what Will was saying. I regret taking some of the courses that I did because I thought I had to have a very academically rigorous course load, and you definitely do, because they look at how tough your course load is relative to your school. So it's okay if your school doesn't have APs or IBs, but you want to take as rigorous as you can within your school. And I went to a very STEM heavy school. A lot of my friends go into engineering, but I had no interest in engineering. So I took like AP chemistry, AP physics, a bunch of classes that were rigorous, that I had no interest in, that took up so much of my time, when I could have done classes that I had a lot more interest in, like maybe AP statistics or computer science, slightly different courses that, because I liked more, wouldn't have been more such a toll. So I spent like hours and hours on chemistry, never used it. They didn't even mention it in my application, of course, because it played no role other than just being a course. So I think not doing things just because I think that that's what I'm supposed to do or what other people are doing is something really important. Another thing is not stressing out too much about individual components of your application that you might not have control over. So my interview went really weirdly. Like, my interviewer thought because I was a debater that he could quiz me on world facts. So he started asking me about like Russian oligarchs and things that I had no understanding of. And I couldn't answer a lot of those questions. It felt more like an Oxford interview than a Harvard interview, which is supposed to be personality based. And I couldn't control the fact that I had an interviewer like that. And I thought it went not like as good as it could have. And in my file, actually, he did write that he didn't think I had a very deep understanding of the world. And so clearly he wasn't like raving about me when other people got in because their interview was really good. Whereas mine, I feel like, was almost a detriment. But later on, I realized that they didn't even really factor that into my application. They never mentioned the interview. I overall got a fine score on my interview, but it wasn't like amazing by any means. And so I think in the moment, something like that can feel like such a big deal, but remembering that it is a holistic admissions process, I hate that word because it's overused a bunch, but it's actually very true that no individual part of your application can make or break it, especially something like an interview where they know there's a lot of variation based on who you get, how you're feeling that day, stuff like that. So I guess like overall, just like don't be, I feel like I was really stressed out and neurotic in a way in high school, and I wish I just took it easy more, that I went out more, that I enjoyed my high school experience a little bit more.
I mean, that is generally very good advice. Yeah, Will.
But I have to add just one more thing, which is slightly unrelated, which is that like with US colleges, like the admissions rates have been declining in the past few years. Like we've seen rates go from like, I don't know, near 10% like 20 years ago down to like 2-3%, like even less for internationals because they are only allowed to accept a certain number of internationals. So I think to that extent, like recognize that I'm not saying the process is random, because it's not. Like they accept people for particular reasons, but also understand that, like, this is actually what the admissions counselor at my school said to me. She was like career advisor. We don't actually have counselors in Australia. She said, like, that, you know, Harvard is building a cohort, and lots of these US schools are building a cohort because they're small, you know, like they're only 1,500, you know, 1,600, 1,700 kids per cohort at Harvard. And so they're actually building a little slice of the world. And so maybe part of the reason they accept someone that year is that, oh, like, one of Harvard's orchestras actually really doesn't have an oboe. Here's a world-class oboe player. And actually next year, we know that oboe is moving out of the orchestra. So maybe part of the reason that person gets admitted is not because of all the other stuff they do, but just for that one factor that they didn't even know was important to Harvard. So I think understanding that when admissions rates are that low, and when it's that sort of fine increments, and when grades actually don't get you over the line, I think appreciating the fact that a lot of it can be down to literally the year that you apply, is an important thing to acknowledge about US admissions. It's not related to any questions. It's not related to anything. But just to, you know, to appreciate that.
Did you also do an interview? Well, I don't recall if you mentioned.
I did, yes. So I ended up getting interviewed by. So what happens with alumni interviews to US schools is there'll be someone who's in your time zone. For one of the other colleges that I applied to, I got interviewed by someone in, I think, India, because it ended up lining up slightly with my Melbourne time zone. But my Harvard interviewer was someone who was actually based in Melbourne, but it was all via Zoom, and it's a pretty informal conversation. I mean, they just ask you quite, you know, there's a bit of a back and forth. The interviews for US colleges are not like the interviews for UK colleges. So I applied to Oxbridge, and, you know, you get an interview, and that's an achievement, and you go in and they sort of grill you, and they've got, you know, two or three tutors giving you questions about economics or something, and you're sort of sitting there. It's not like that for the US. The alumni interviews are like, I think this is my theory. My theory is that it's just to, like, identify people that are, like, really, like, red flags. Like, as long as you can hold a conversation with someone, I think they're going to be pretty fine.
Yeah, let's please not talk about Oxbridge interviews. It's been nearly 30 years and I'm still getting PTSD. A question here from Kitty in the chat, which is, what would schools consider to be sort of good community service projects? Again, it's a very broad question, Kitty. You know, maybe you could share a little bit about projects that you were involved in, or that, you know, other people on the team, your friends at Harvard, who were involved in, as sort of representative of the sort of thing that we're talking about.
I think it's like, what's the saying? Like, it's a blue sky, or it's a blue ocean. Like, you could truly do anything, as long as it's like an actual cause that matters. Like, I personally got involved a lot in, like, women's rights groups, like gender equality committees, like sustainability efforts, because that was something I cared about as well. So those are some of the topics. I know a lot of my friends worked with homeless shelters, food banks. A lot of them were also involved in sustainability too. So I think, like, there's just, like, truly everything. I'm actually trying to remember off the top of my head. I don't know if Will, you know of any that strike you particularly. I think also, like, you can combine debate also into a service-based thing. If you teach people in underserved communities debate, if you tutor kids who don't have access to some of those. So yeah, I think also if the cause is personal to you, it makes it even more impactful. So I know a lot of people who, for example, some of my friends who suffer from learning disabilities or from autism have particular advocacy towards that, or some of my friends whose parents suffered from cancer. Like, those are things that mean a lot to you, because there's an underlying reason for why you're involved with that, beyond just, like, looking good for your resume.
Yeah, I think Angela's is completely, like, there needs to be an underlying reason why you're doing something. Like, it's important to appreciate the logic here. So it needs to be something, like, you care about, you know, deeply and genuinely, and then that actually motivates you to go and do something about that. So identifying sort of good and correct service projects it might be better to think of it as saying, okay, like an assessment of what you care about deeply and how that then comes out in action. Like I want to be a high school teacher. I want to be a maths teacher at a high school when I graduate Harvard. That's like what I've wanted. That's all I've ever wanted. So in high school, I actually ended up doing a lot of like tutoring stuff and working with kids because I really love that and I want to work in a classroom. I'm also, gay and, I've been for many years through high school. And so a lot of my work ended up sort of being sort of service work in that space, or maybe kind of community work in that space, working with home shelters that cater particularly to queer people that were sort of cast out on the streets. And then also I was like linguistics a lot. I'm thinking of doing it at Harvard, and also politics. And in Australia, that actually ended up leading me to work with remote communities, Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory, who are have instances where their language is actually being lost, and where there's an interesting question of where the government should be involved. And so actually getting to live in a remote community for a couple of weeks is really, really interesting. So I think the root very much needs to be, what are you interested in and what do you care about? And then how can you actualize that? How can you do some service work that speaks to that?
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thanks, Kitty, for the question. The last couple of questions I want to ask you guys are about, I guess, life at Harvard or being in the Harvard debate team. A bit more general, but I think also very useful for people to try and get a picture of what they're actually trying to get into, what they're trying to achieve. I guess the most general question is, now that you are in Harvard College, how do you find the work-life balance? How do you find, is it a large cohort of very smart people studying all the time, or do you actually manage to do stuff that isn't debate? I mean, how do you find this sort of campus experience now that you've been able to experience it in person in Cambridge? Angela, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think college is so much fun and it's very different from high school. Like I feel like I very rarely went out in high school. Maybe that's just my experience, but I found that I was constantly working in high school and there was like no work-life balance. Whereas at college, like pretty much everyone I know, maybe it's like a self-selecting circle, but most of my friends and I try to go out at least 1 or 2 times a week. We always, even when we're studying, we try to make it into a social activity. So we'll, study in groups in the dining hall or, go to a nice cafe together. Right now, a lot of my friends some of them are out partying at a club and others are having a movie night like downstairs where I would be when I finish this panel. So I definitely think there can be work-life balance if you so choose, and it depends a lot on what classes you take, what clubs you do. Like some of my friends who are on D1, which is basically like a varsity athlete team while also being pre-med, still manage to find time to go out. Other people who are taking like grad school math and computer science classes also find time to go out. And I think that's the fun of college. Like you no longer are expected to maintain like perfect grades all the time. A lot of those extracurriculars that took up a lot of your time during high school, you no longer have to do because unless you're applying to grad school, there's really no application after this. It's just here for you to enjoy. And one thing that I really learned early on, or not early on, but recently in college is how to quit, like the art of saying no. There's a lot of activities you feel like you should do, but you don't have to do anymore. And that's why college is awesome. So for me personally, I've learned to drop classes that I don't find interesting anymore, to quit activities. Like I recently quit a dance club that was taking up a lot of my time because it wasn't sparking joy for me anymore. So yeah, I definitely think you can have work-life balance here.
Yeah, I totally agree with Angela. Everything she said, and for all the reasons, right? Like being at college is wonderful. I think in part because you're living on the same place that you're living in the same place that you're eating, that you're studying, that you're doing all your clubs at, and that all your friends are at the same time. That's a very interesting sort of confluence of factors, and that's the case for lots of top US colleges and also just US colleges in general. It's certainly not a feature of Australian universities. Again, it's why it's also a little bit new to me. I think also a lot of it is what you make of it. Like if you want to take like a raft of insanely difficult like subjects and join 20 clubs, then that's your prerogative, and there are some people that grind themselves doing that. But it's interesting to note that I don't know many juniors or seniors that do a bunch of clubs. Like by the time you get to junior or senior year, you've really honed in and figured out what really interests you and motivates you and sustains you for years. And you figured out, you know, what your major or your concentration is, and therefore what you really interested in academically. And then around that, you pretty much just enjoy yourself and do what you want. So there is and can be and will be a work-life balance if you're willing to accept that you don't need to do all the things and be brilliant at everything. Yeah, and I think the last thing, Angela's so right. Like the art of saying no to things. Like, sure, everyone is applying to the consulting club on campus, or everyone is, you know, wanting to be part of X music group, or everyone is, you know, by the way, these groups are all like wonderful and brilliant. I have friends in them. But, you know, accepting that you are not going to be the best at everything and not going to be able to do everything is also really important and formative, and makes that work-life balance a lot easier to manage.
Absolutely. I just want to cycle back to a similar question, which I just got by message from someone asking about extracurriculars again in the application process. And the question is, how do you make up for those extracurricular activities which you missed out on, that you haven't done as a school student? So if you're the one person that doesn't play a musical instrument, or you don't do sport, or there's some large sort of sector which is just not your thing, what's the best way to deal with that? Should you overcompensate by doing twice as many things in another field, or should you not stress about it? Doesn't matter. How would you, you know, what would be your approach there? Oh, difficult question, Angela.
Does that mean like they have done extracurriculars, but they are missing something in another category, or just haven't done any?
I guess it means like you have extracurriculars, but they're all maybe focused on, you know, it's like debate and MUN and mock trial, but not music and sports and something else, for example.
I think there's still time to do things to get involved. Like, you don't have to make a big splash or suddenly become president of your school if you weren't involved in student government. I also think self-directed projects are very interesting, because that's completely on your timeline and you get to kind of individualize it. So service, I think, is one thing that is very personal, because it's not always part of a structured group or club. So also don't feel the need to fill every category. Like, I got like the lowest score on sports because I never did sports, and it's never something that I will do. So don't feel like you have to do everything. I think doing like activities that are all kind of in one area also makes sense, because you're interested in that area. So it just kind of shows that you're willing to like explore deeply within one area, as opposed to spreading yourself too thin.
Yeah, I concur with everything Andrew said.
Great. Okay, thanks for the question there, Jane. Okay, another question we had was about the Harvard debate team particularly. And I know you have two debate teams or two debate unions on campus, so I guess we're talking specifically about the Harvard College Debating Union. Is it super selective to get in once you're in Harvard, or is it open? And what's the application process? And then what are the sort of training or practice? I mean, basically, how does it work? You know, Angela said she's more of a social member, which sounds awesome. But yeah, Will.
Yeah. So I didn't do Worlds. I'm really regretful I didn't do Worlds, but I didn't do Worlds. And so I came on, and the way it works is you sort of sign up when you get here, and there are two rounds of kind of debates you need to do. And it's not even really a debate. They give you a topic and they give you 15 minutes to prepare, and they get you to sort of stand up and just walk into a room with some of the team members and to deliver a speech on that topic. And then they kind of ask you questions. I'm pretty sure it changes from year to year. This is just how they did it this year. I remember sitting in the waiting room for the first one, and I was sat across from, I think, one person, I think they're on Team Canada, one person Team Australia, and the other one who's on Team USA. And I was just like, wow, I am so not going to get onto the team. And it turned out to be the case that actually the team accepts quite a few people. I think there are maybe 30 or 40 novices that they accepted this year, which is like quite a lot. Obviously they cut quite a lot of people. So, you need to be reasonably intelligent and articulate to get on. But the current president of the debating union, for example, had no debate experience in high school. And he's the president of the entire union. There are a bunch of novices that did no debate in high school at all and have got in. And so it's, if you're debating at Worlds, if you're debating at high school, then you're probably getting your foot in the door in the first place. Sorry, and I'm talking a lot now. I promise I'll answer things. Once you're in, what was really wonderful is that it seems like a lot of people's experiences of debate in high school was quite internally competitive. I don't want to generalize, but it seems like that's the case, wanting to sort of be incrementally better than X person or whatever. It's not, that's not the way that I seem to understand the vibes, at least at Harvard. Everyone's really supportive of one another, which is so amazing. We have like trainings that you can sign up for each week. If you want to debate a BP round, and you want to get a few friends together, they'll give you a topic and a varsity to judge you. There are wonderful socials that are hosted where the team gets together and sort of, does fun things. And there are tournaments, there are multiple tournaments every weekend. Like last weekend, I was judging the US debating championships in upstate New York. Next weekend, I'll be going to Brown, probably to judge some, to compete in some APTA. There was a tournament at Yale the weekend before. There are people off at Cambridge. And there are people at Oxford, going to Oxford this weekend, actually are in the air as we speak, about to debate. So there's so many different opportunities. And actually, to the extent that a lot of the time, like, we won't be able to, like, that if you really want to debate and want to make debate a big part of the way that you go about college, then that is your prerogative once you're part of the HCDU. Sorry, I've talked for a long time.
Sorry, just to jump in before Angela gives her answer, does Harvard, how does it work in terms of tournament fees now that we are able to travel to competitions? Does Harvard fund the travel of everybody to competitions?
So within the HCDU, the way it happens is pretty much if the debate is in North America, pretty much it'll be fun. So as members of the debating team, I don't pay any money to take part in debating. It's completely free. In terms of the Oxford and Cambridge and sort of overseas stuff, those you also don't pay money to participate in those. So that's covered by the union. But those are usually more selective. So for example, I think that I can't remember, there might have been 3 teams, I think, that were sent to Cambridge IV and a few judges maybe. And that was actually quite selective. So they had some tryouts for that. But pretty much lots of North American stuff. There's lots of BP that happens in the US at college. It was all like the team pays the registration fees, the team pays for transport. By the team, I mean, sorry, the HCDU, the organization. So as a member, I don't pay anything, which is wonderful.
Thanks. Angela, do you have any other comments on the getting into the team and your experience in the debate team?
Yeah, I think Will covered most of it. It's like open to a wide range of people. They know if you haven't done debate before, and it will be impressive if you just know things about the world. You don't have to be very good at like the mechanics of debating, but if you show potential, I think they're super willing to accept you for that. The process is like a written application, I think 3 rounds of debating, but it's very relaxed. So there's like, I think you give like a 5-minute PM speech, and it's not against other people, I think, at least from my year. But it's really like what you make of it. So me, when I entered into college, I was super like tired of debating. Like I spent like every weekend in high school debating. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But then I got roped in because I was like, okay, the people are really awesome. I still want to be part of this, just maybe not competing all the time. And that's totally fine. All I have to do is judge some tournaments that we host, like Harvard WSDC, Harvard APTA, and I could occasionally help out, but other than that, I have no obligations to compete, which is great. So it's completely up to me whether I want to go to tournaments or not, which is why I consider myself a social member, aka I'm in the club for social reasons, not for competitive ones. And yeah, it's awesome. Highly recommend.
So it's a bit like the college experience in microcosm. Like it can be as intense as you want it to be. If you are super competitive and you want to go to Worlds, you want to go to Cambridge, and if you're good enough, obviously, then you can do all those things. But if you just want to hang out with hopefully smart, interesting other people and debate from time to time, you can also do that. Sounds perfect. Okay, last couple of questions before we let you guys go to movie club or whatever it was. one question I had was, what was the biggest surprise for you about life on campus? I mean, you both obviously coming from outside of, coming from high school, but coming from outside of the country to some extent. And, you know, we all have certain, I guess, preconceptions about life in university generally, and Harvard more specifically. So what did you find most surprising or most different from what you had perhaps been imagining? Will?
Yeah, I think I had come to Harvard, and like Harvard's kind of like it's like a punchline, right? Like it's this byword for lots of different things. I think I had assumed that lots of the stereotypes are true. I think some of the stereotypes are true, but lots of them are not. I was just fascinated, particularly during orientation week, like meeting a bunch of people and realizing, like, firstly, how interesting everyone is. Like, I had not interacted with many Americans before, or many international students before. And now it was kind of, wow, everyone is at the same place at the same time. And it's cool to hear everyone's stories. Also how goofy people are and sort of normal, which is really good, and it helps disarm a lot of the kind of imposter syndrome, fear of, a big, really wonderful school like Harvard. I also think, it was wonderful, I think, over the last few months to build a circle of friends, and to realize that they're actually really nice, sort of supportive people at Harvard that you can have as friends. That was particularly helpful because I had sort of pretty bad stuff that happened a few weeks ago, and actually being able to reach out to my friends and to realize that they actually cared a lot about me was really good. So I think that's, it's not that they surprised me, it's that maybe I wasn't expecting it to actually be that kind of warm and sort of normal.
Angela, any thoughts on that?
I think, yeah, like everyone here is a lot more humble and helpful than you think. Like, I don't know if this is true of all high schools, but at least in my high school, it's definitely very cutthroat and toxic. Like, people would not send you their notes like for classes, or they would even like send you the wrong answers for like homework and stuff like that. Whereas here it's like the complete opposite. Like I've only survived some of my harder classes because I worked with like my friends. Like a lot of them are like so willing to spend hours out of their own day just to sit down and teach you and walk you through concepts, or get food for you when you're sick, or like make tea for you when you aren't feeling well. Like people here are genuinely one of my favorite parts about this school, and I'm sure it's true everywhere, but it just shocked me because I know a lot of people think Harvard is so competitive, like everyone's out for themselves, and maybe that was true when they're trying to get in, but now that they're here, it's not really cool to act that way anymore. So majority of people are very helpful and humble. I also think another thing that really interested me was everyone here is like very social. Like I don't think they fit that stereotypical archetype of like the person who stays in and just like studies all day. Like there certainly are those people, and I think I was one of those people in high school, but now that people have gotten to college, they really like branch out a lot more. Like people love going out here. Like some of my friends who are seniors go out every single night, and so it is definitely a very social school. Maybe the parties are not as nice as big state schools, but you don't choose a college for your parties anyway, or maybe that's not how I chose my school. So yeah. Also, one thing that surprised me in almost a counter reverse way is everyone says that Harvard has a lot of grade inflation, and maybe in some classes, but I would say in a lot of like the harder STEM classes, that is certainly not true. So I would say this whole idea that you just like breeze through and do nothing all of college is definitely not true. So you have to take your classwork somewhat seriously here.
One question I've had from students, particularly from parents a couple of times in recent years, is concern about going to the US for different reasons, some of which, like COVID, for example, have dissipated, hopefully. But, other concerns about, political situation or racism or other things which cause them to question whether the United States is the right place for them. So maybe you're both in different ways international students, I guess. What has been your perception of that, or what would be your advice to somebody who's maybe still a little hesitant to take that step for whatever reason, that they may be concerned it isn't as welcoming a place as you would hope it would be?
I might Yeah. So I actually for a long time was scared of traveling to the US. So I remember we went on one family holiday to the US for a couple of weeks before we came, and I was terrified because like the US had guns and stuff, and that was really scary. I'm from like Australia, which very famously is very stringent gun control. Just like that was actually my like paranoid fear was that I was just gonna like get shot or something very quickly. And so there was that fear of that, like firearms, but also fear of things like healthcare. Like I quite like socialized healthcare, and I come from a country where that's sort of unambiguously a good thing. So I come to the US where there was this whole sort of complicated mess of different insurance schemes I need to buy was a bit scary. And I was also, a little bit worried about the politics, that the US is really kind of in a very interesting place politically. And I'm finding that kind of my fears aren't really being borne out. I think if college campuses tend to be quite safe because lots of college campuses have large kinds of security, particularly in the case of Harvard, like where we're in Cambridge, which is a relatively safe neighborhood, and that is pretty much the case for lots of US colleges as well, that you have kind of campus security, and they sort of take that quite seriously. I'm not sure I can speak a lot about the politics. What I would say is I haven't had any massively political conversations with people. I haven't had any political fallings out with people yet. I think the US is a big, beautiful, complicated country. It leads the world in higher education. And that's something important to keep in mind. I also think that maybe there is a slight risk involved, as there is for anyone, any child that moves out of home. Like I'm sure, any parent would be a bit worried about their kid moving somewhere overseas where they, unable to see them regularly. But I think it's important to kind of weigh this against being able to get a world-class education, something they will not receive anywhere else. So a bunch of uncollected thoughts.
I think my experience is a little bit different because Canada and the US are very culturally similar, but I think some of those things about healthcare definitely stand true. One wonderful thing about this school is that you don't have to suffer through the complications of insurance firms because you can just buy Harvard insurance, and that works great. I got a concussion last semester, and this insurance did me well. I think some of these concerns are definitely very true for the United States as a whole, but I think if you're careful about selecting which schools you go to, those won't feel like concerns at all. Like Boston is a very, very liberal place, a very safe place as well. And most Ivy Leagues, or like a lot of these schools in big cities, tend to be pretty liberal and like welcoming. I would definitely say like Boston is super diverse, and a lot of these schools select diversity for a reason, so you will not feel like an outsider at all. Like some campuses, I would say like outsiders not as safe, but that's up to you to decide. I guess you can like search up like crime statistics before you go, but I would say like Cambridge is very safe. And if you don't like American politics, you can always apply to Canadian universities too. University of Toronto, McGill are great schools, and they're very similar to a lot of these American schools too, without all the politics and healthcare mess. So yeah.
Yeah, but the weather, come on, the winter, not so much.
What country is Australia?
Fair enough. Yeah, okay. Last questions. I will let you go, and I do want to just ask to the students who are here in the meeting, and to those who may be watching this afterwards. Any last words of wisdom or words of inspiration, or anything that you would want to have heard from a student at Ivy League university when you were involved in the application process?
I think, look, debating is can be a wonderful component of your application overseas. As we've been talking about, it is wonderful both because it sort of develops those soft skills, and maybe kinds of achievements in that sort of space really stand out to US colleges, and they might actually select for those. So probably continue down this path if it's something that you genuinely really love and enjoy and authentically sort of get quite excited about. I think like the application process will be long. I certainly think one piece of advice that I would give that I didn't give before was try and start your applications reasonably early. I made the mistake of applying. So I applied early round to one college and then got deferred and then had like 15 days to write 15 applications. So it was shocking. So I would just encourage more planning. So I understand that if you're going to apply to, I don't know, 5 schools or 10 schools, or however many it is, I understand each of those is its own separate thing that needs to be, you need to be careful as well that you're not, doubling up on stuff and, overemphasizing one thing. You want to make sure you get a good spread of, explaining yourself in each application. So actually planning beforehand and understanding the whole process of writing in advance is going to be really useful. Also, as I think, we've mentioned, understand that academics are important, but they might not be as important as you think they are. And I know that sounds crazy coming from our ivory towers, but understand in the US, extracurriculars are really important. And if you want to make the US your educational sort of home, then maybe sacrificing a little bit, and it doesn't even need to be sacrificing, but taking some time away from academics and maybe diverting it towards extracurriculars can actually be quite helpful and useful.
I totally agree with all of those. Starting early is really important. Essay writing takes a lot of time and a lot of iterations. I would say not just essays too, thinking about where you want to apply, making a spreadsheet of those different schools and showing your guidance counselor, and reaching out to teachers beforehand too, because a lot of teachers, I don't know how many people from your school tend to apply to American schools, but if they do, teachers get busy around marking season too. So you want to make sure you let them know ahead of time, because they're not going to write a great recommendation letter if they're doing it a day before the deadline. And they're also not going to appreciate you very much for making them do that in the first place. So letting everyone know in your circle who needs to know about your application early will make your life and their life a lot easier. Another thing is, I think it's important to do activities that are meaningful to you, not only for the resume purposes of actually being authentic and not seeming like padding, but also because at the end of the day, college admissions is super, super random. Tons of people I know who are super qualified didn't get in. People who was a little bit surprised also got in. So I think one thing that I really liked about my experience in high school was I felt like even if I didn't get into any school and I ended up just going to school in Canada, I really wouldn't have changed any of the activities that I had done, because they would really suck if you ended up, maybe with the outcome that you weren't expecting or didn't want. And as a result, all the 4 years, or maybe even more, 6 years, if you've done debate for a long time, felt like just a waste of your time and you regretted doing any of it. So that's something that's really important. And lastly, I think being open-minded too. I mean, a lot of debaters are debaters because they like social sciences and humanities, but I also recommend exploring things outside of your comfort zone. I think a lot of students here took classes in all kinds of different departments, even if it had nothing to do with their intended major. I think the school really likes when you have intellectual curiosity and the ability to explore many different areas, especially because that's reflected in our liberal arts curriculum. So if you want to specialize, you can go to a specialized vocational school. That's kind of the path. But if you're applying to Ivy Leagues, you're applying to schools where you are challenged to take courses in a wide range of disciplines. So at Harvard specifically, we have a quantitative reasoning with data requirements. So you have to take a class in mathematics, statistics, or computer science, or something like that that has a quantitative backbone. You also have to take expository writing, which is a class that teaches you how to actually write and construct a compelling essay. You have to take classes in every single division in the humanities and social sciences and STEM as well. And there's a lot of different ones. So if you're not a STEM student, it's okay. You can take something like Gov 50, which is a political science, data science course. So the fact that our curriculum reflects this shows that you should also be willing and interested, hopefully, in a variety of different subjects, even in high school early
on. And that also certainly maps across to lots of top US colleges. They're all going to have distributional requirements, or you actually need to be able to be interested in a lot of different things, and you're compelled to have to do lots of things.
That's great advice. So don't spend all your time debating, kids. I strongly advise against it. It's best to have a life in other ways as well. Will, Angela, thank you so much for sharing your time with us on a Friday night. I know it's the most precious time of the week. So we really, really highly appreciate it. And to all of you who participated in this seminar as well, thanks for coming. Again, very much appreciated. So please feel free to give give them a reaction emoji or something like that. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next event, whenever that may be. So once again, Angela, Will, thanks very much, and have an awesome weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good weekend.
So much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.